something I have told our team a lot of times is like, I would like us to get accused of wasting time in prayer. And so when in doubt, prayer just has a way of unifying our team, reminding us that we're not in the event management business. We're not working for a production house. We're in full-time ministry. The things that you should seek to understand are probably the things that make you frustrated the quickest. None of us want to be judged by the 2 minutes we're late or by the soundbite where someone doesn't have context of our meeting. And so be curious, and be curious first about the things you're most frustrated by, because that's what you actually need to know. Planning Center is a tool, but the Spirit moving and active in those individual bodies of people is more important than a centralized program sheet. And I think people can quickly look at a church of our size and go, you all have the best of everything. And I don't want to say we don't have great gear, because we do, and we're wildly thankful for it. But we are probably working with a lot of the same headaches and a lot of the same tools and a lot of the same old infrastructure that a lot of other churches do.
Brad Bramer, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Hey man, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Brad, it's great to have you on the show, and I've been a follower on your account for a while and have been really just enjoying the content you've been producing and putting out for the online audience. But I'd love to introduce you to our audience here at Churchfront. Why don't you kind of take some time and tell our people who you are, what you do, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, man. Glad to be on. It's cool. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and so I am an executive producer here at Southeast Christian Church. We're a fairly large multi-site church in the Louisville and Southern Indiana area of the United States, and I oversee our worship production and creative teams. And so whether it's resourcing Ableton or building up ProPresenter files or building new campuses or staffing events and classrooms or website creative, marketing, design, film, all that kind of stuff. I'm certainly, my channel's in the production space, which has been fun. It's a passion of mine. I love doing it. And it's been a great way to get me connected to some people that I'm learning from and hanging with, like yourself.
It's really good. It's really good. So back up and tell us kind of what got you to where you are today. What's your background? How did you get into the role that you're in today at the church?
So my background, I was a worship pastor for 15 plus years, from student ministry to college age to adult weekend services. I left ministry for about 4 or 5 years and ran a lighting production company in the Louisville area. We did a lot of events, shows, galas, things like that. I ended up joining staff at Southeast Christian in 2015 in the communications role. So I was actually scoring all of our video projects, doing field recording, Foley, and helping do a lot of our worship, original worship content. And so I was really more on the back end, still leading worship every now and then, but really hung that up in 2017, 18. And I don't know that I've formally led worship since then. But it's given me a passion for how all of these creative and technical and functional and content pieces come together in live environments, and how those live environments can live, beyond an hour on Sunday. So I started producing weekend services, started integrating more with kind of the preaching, worship, production wheelhouse around here. And, a lot of churches, there's a big disconnect between these artistry and technical sides and the more organizational ministry side. And I've been an associate pastor at churches. I've done payroll at churches. And so I kind of the Lord's put me in this little window of jack of all trades, master of none. But I can speak a lot of languages. I know enough about a lot of things to probably make some really reckless and, stupid decisions. And so it seemed good to be a glue guy to get a lot of these funnels and ecosystems really working in common directions and through some common vision.
Yeah. Man, the skill set that you walk into that role with from your different backgrounds is probably pretty diverse. What are the things that you find that you've used in all of the environments? Like if you were to speak to one skill or a couple skills that you feel like have translated from the worship pastor environment to the creative role you're in now to, you ran payroll, like what are some of the things that you find are consistent in a ministry context that have been helpful for you?
Uh, the first thing would probably just be I know how people feel because I've been in a lot of these roles, and so when each of these areas of disciplines don't feel value, I generally know what that feels like because I've sat in those roles, I've been on those teams, and I've experienced the disappointment and the success in those areas. And so uh, I'm not an overly emotional person. Like this is me at my high point and low point. I'm pretty monotone throughout my entire existence here. Um, but producing creative people is something I'm really passionate about, and producing
Mm,
technical people. I'm really passionate about technology and artistry coming together. And I think whether it's on dynamics, calling chords, knowing how a PA should feel, knowing how a video needs to be designed and pre-production so that it feels right in the moment, but can still have legs after the event. All of those things are the things I'm most passionate about, and the efficiencies in that, the team building in that. Um, I have longed to be a part of a team where the creative areas, the production relatives, the production areas, and the worship areas are really well integrated, and love being in the same room and space and share as much commonality, workflow, wins uh, as humanly possible. And
yeah.
often in ministry, those can be some of the more divided teams. Um, and so I try my best to speak a lot of the languages and use a lot of shared experience across all of them to move forward together.
Yeah. I wonder if you can speak to that for a second from your perspective at Southeast or in any other context, what do you feel like is the biggest maybe divisive contributor or roadblock to team unity among those creative environments? You're talking about kind of graphics and technical artists, and then you're talking about musicians and songwriters and things like that. So if you were to kind of pool those into a community or a one size group, what would you say is the main divisive factor in there? What have you seen?
I genuinely don't think that people are out to get one another. I think so much of that divisiveness comes out of lack of curiosity,
Hmm.
and people don't understand what somebody else does, and they don't know what they do and why that matters. Um, and so whether it's a music director or worship team doesn't realize why stage organization really helps their tech or production teams, or why graphic design needs to span to web to social to an iMag in the room, or how long it takes to build an Ableton session and to resource volunteers exceptionally well.
Hmm.
People Some of the people in the comms team or creative team don't understand how taxing scheduling volunteers can be. And those are just real things that everyone assumes that, aren't you just running sound on a Sunday? Or aren't you just playing somebody else's song every other week? Or aren't you just drawing pictures or doing, everyone makes a lot of assumptions on the last 10% of people's roles and not really
Hmm.
factoring in the 90% of meat and potatoes that get that 10% of output.
How have you navigated that in your own ministry context here at Southeast? Is there something that you have done to kind of nullify some of that lack of understanding?
So when I started, the creative and production relationships were a little tense.
Okay.
Uh, so I know we're a rarity, right? And that's because production wanted things in 59 and we wanted to shoot in 24. And if you're going to convert it, we're not going to convert it for you. You're going to have to do that because of artistic integrity. And that, so much of that tug of war is really about who gets the final say. And at the end of the day, once you get people in the same room, everyone wants to make content that plays really well in the room, right?
Yeah.
And you don't want 24 being converted, to 29 and then up converted to 59i so that a 29p will, all this kind of stuff, right? Because that doesn't look good for anybody. So one of the things that we have started doing really the last 5-6 years is our creative team works weekends. So they cam op, they run graphics, they shoot photography, whatever. But we've tried to really make every weekend a team investment. And so it's not just something that worship people do. It's not just something production people do. I'm a big believer in quick 15-minute touch points that end up building a lot of face-to-face relationships, and also a lot of shared knowledge. And so instead of having a production weekend meeting or a worship weekend meeting and then a creative weekend meeting, we have a meeting, a 15-minute walkthrough where the creative team's going to hear the technical aspects that go into it. And they're going to hear when we go, hey, if we make that set list change, can you make sure to let our lighting guy know because it, does this? Or we're automated lyrics. How are we triggering that? Is that time code? Is that SMPTE? Is that a MIDI trigger from ProPresenter? What is it? We have tried to give more awareness that our music director resources, not just like the tracks in the chord chart, but like an alto part, a soprano part, a tenor part, EG2. So every volunteer at every campus walks up and they go, I feel equipped. I feel like I have directionality. And so in those quick meetings, we are sharing a lot of the 90%. And we're in the same room at least 4 times a week, talking and praying together about the weekend. So that by the time we have Thursday service here. So that by the time we hit Thursday, we've probably talked it to death. We've had some fun. We've rabbit holed. We've made some jokes. We've talked about the funny clip that's going around. We're being stupid, and that way you get to actual service execution. And these are people you've walked the week with. And you build some practical times, you build some intentional times, whether it's a moment of, hey, let's just take a moment to pray here, or hey, share the worst Halloween costume you've ever had, or your favorite Halloween movie, whatever it is. It's October, so we've been doing that. But just little disciplines go a long way. And I'm a big believer in the small, consistent things that produce the big outputs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that 15-minute touch point, I feel like it's a little bit of a culture shift if you're not used to that, or if maybe you are in this kind of death by meeting culture. So that, I think that really is a good key takeaway for some of our listeners to maybe consolidate the different meetings you might be having leading up to a weekend and try to get it all in the same room at the same time. Is that something that you guys do? You said you had Thursday services. So when you say you have a 15-minute touch point, are you doing this pre-service on a Thursday, or are you doing this like in the office in the week, in your week time? Walk me through like when that happens, what the structure is like.
So we'll talk through our weekends, Monday afternoons for 15 minutes, and that's with all of our campuses and our campus worship leaders, production directors, campus pastors, connections pastors. They're all invited to a 15-minute video call where we talk about where our pastor's going, what's being resourced, and kind of where we all need to be, marching to the same beat, and where we have a lot of flexibility to explore across campuses. That's one. We meet with our campus staff, which has worship and production and campus staff, specifically to talk about things that are just happening at this campus. Pray together. What's going on? What are the announcements? Who's hosting? What microphone? Is it a headset? Or, we start getting into a little bit of arrangements and what's going on. And then Thursday, day of, we start our day just kind of actually talking through on a really technical end. Where are we providing underscore for hosts? How long do we wait before this video this video ends? Do we wait 5 seconds? Do we wait 15 seconds? What's the cue to go into the next song? How are we getting into sermon? Who's our volunteers? What positions do we really need to be intentional about based on our crew, or what other things are going on? And from there, we've really systematized a lot of our rehearsal to make sure that, production's getting the things that they really need to have a successful Thursday, and worship showing up prepared to be able to pastor and lead our room from an upfront perspective. So whether that's a dedicated vocal rehearsal, dedicated band rehearsal, instead of one really long rehearsal that just
Mm-hmm.
allows everyone to dial into their trade and their area and their discipline a little bit more. And a lot of that stuff wasn't like a master plan. It was, hey, it'd be really helpful for our broadcast engineer if our vocal team showed up to rehearsal ready to go. So what if they took 30 minutes and we just focused on a backline, and then they came out really understanding, dialed in on their parts, vocals warmed up. All of those things are just coming through simple collaboration and feedback, not through frustration or big, oh my gosh, everything's awful. So that's a normal workflow. And we have team meetings that go into that. Something I have told our team a lot of times is like, I would like us to get accused of wasting time in prayer. And so when
Mm-hmm.
in doubt, prayer just has a way of unifying our team, reminding us that we're not in the event management business. We're not working for a production house. We're in full-time ministry. And pray for one another, pray for our leaders, pray for our volunteers. And prayerful preparation is one of our weekend values. And it is encouraging to look at 6 disciplined times, before every Thursday where I know people are gathering to pray just for that thing.
Yeah.
And prayer has a way of unifying us, so does being in the same room. And so we try to do that as much as we can in small doses without just wasting hours and hours on end.
Yep. You said something that will get clipped, and I want to share it around, that you want to get accused of wasting time in prayer. That's something that is not. I feel like is just the opposite of some of the personality types in tech world, and because we're very kind of nuts and bolts, black and white. We want to get to our station and kind of just roll through the punches of execution, and I think that's something that's good to be reminded of, is that not only does it unify, but it kind of grounds us, or it regrounds us in what the goal of the weekend is. So I'm thankful that you shared that perspective, because I think it will kind of reground us, reorient our framework for our listeners and our audience. When you talk about your team and some of the things that you do in those meetings, one of the things that you said early on in this conversation too is that you feel like the lack of unity comes from a lack of understanding. So what have been some of your practices? And you have such a unique skill set, having been in some of these diverse roles and different contexts, so that you walk in there and you can kind of automatically understand the shoes that some of those people are in. For somebody who's maybe not as experienced in a role, in a leadership role, being a worship pastor, tech director in a church, what would be some advice or some guidance you would give to them in ways that they can understand their team, or even seek to understand their team better? Like, is there any kind of practical implications for postures, language, approaches that they could use?
Yeah, the things that you should seek to understand are probably the things that make you frustrated the quickest.
Mm,
And so if there are things that happen multiple times a week that are just irking you, and you think, is this person unaware? Are they just lazy? Do they just not care about how this affects me? Those are usually the first areas that you can press in. And this happened with someone on our team. It was about punctuality, and we had somebody that was recurrently late. And that just got under a couple people's skin. And so come to find out, something that I try to beat this drum as much as I can is like, be curious, not skeptical, be curious, not cynical. And so ask that person why they're late. Before you complain about it, ask about it. And come to find out, this person was doing a lot of other projects, trying to steward their time really, really well. And the drive time from building to building would just get him because he was trying to maximize that window. So in his attempt to be a great steward, he was actually dishonoring some other, people. Well, that's an easy bridge to cross, right? And that's not actually, on the surface, it's disrespectful. On the bottom, it's an intention to be a great steward. Those are hard things to manage, and we all live in that.
mm-hmm.
And none of us want to be judged by the 2 minutes we're late or by the soundbite. where someone doesn't have context of our meeting. And so be curious, and be curious first about the things you're most frustrated by, because that's what you actually need to know. And share your, we use your voice. Generally speaking, in church settings, there are great people who love the Lord, who want to succeed. And so many people roll over and die instead of honoring, and being humble, and just being a little bit more intentional to go, hey, do you understand that this little thing actually communicates this? I can't imagine that's your intention, but can we talk through it? Can we talk about it? And, we can't all predict the things that are going to make us react emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not the thing it doesn't warrant it. And it's because it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Deal with those to protect your culture, to protect your relationship. Our senior pastor has told us this a handful of times, but he's like, before Jesus went to the cross, he prayed for one thing. He could have prayed for the mission to succeed. He could have prayed for accelerated growth. He prayed for unity.
Wow.
And that's something worth protecting. Unity in our front of ministry, unity in our team approaching the disciplines and giftedness that God gave us. Those are the things that are really worth protecting. And we have tried to discipline our process, but also discipline our reaction to take those things serious. And we could always do a better job. Of course, everyone could, right? That's one of those, it's like a fruit of the Spirit. You're never going to arrive. You're always going to be in process. So yeah.
I love that. That was, so insightful. And the part about Jesus' prayer before going to the cross, praying for unity, is, as a disciple of Jesus, it's something we can strive for even just in our personal lives. And I think one of the barriers that you spoke to is just the lack of communication, maybe the verbal communication. And for whatever reason, there is that roadblock for a lot of people, that they don't feel confident, or they don't feel enabled to speak what's on their mind. And part of that is probably because we live in an online culture where everything is digitized, and we've lost the art of communication between in-person, people to people. So I would even say that too, strive for learning how to communicate in grace and love and truth and humility to your brothers and sisters in Christ, to allow you guys to move past conflict and build the kingdom. That's all of our goals.
It's so true. Even, literally before we started jumping on this, I've had two things happen before this. Number one was a debrief over a project that a lot of our teams had their hands in, where we had worship, creative, and production all in the same room, being uncomfortably honest about ways that we could grow, and some things that one team did that they didn't intend to do that dishonored, somebody else. At the same time, I had somebody go, hey, I have some feedback for someone, because I feel like, I don't think they're as self-aware as maybe the team thinks.
Sure.
And I want to take that person out to lunch and walk with them, give them some feedback. How can I do that graciously? And do you think that's a good season and way to do that? Those are ways that ministry happens to one another.
Yeah.
And you're not piggy banking or caching these negative experiences that build up a wall of resentment to the people that you are linking arms with in ministry. Mm-hmm. And when so much of the prayer piece, I know this is a production podcast, but it's turned into a pastoral one.
I love it.
So much of the prayer piece is that we are so drawn to the logistics in all of our worlds, execution, call times. That is what is built into us. And if we forget what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and who we're doing it for, which is the Lord, then everything becomes sideways so quick. And then we're really no different than a production house or a creative agency or a music label.
Man.
And we're the church. So protect what God has created and God has instilled as the hope of the world. So it's the small stuff that really matters. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're
Yeah.
trusting the Spirit to do the work, right? So when we pray, it again, it reorients us to where the actual power of change is coming from. Yeah, that's exceptional. I love it. We could jam on that forever because we could. I think it really is the place that a lot of the tech and the creative places and ministries get sucked into. They get lost. They get, they kind of forget the spiritual or the prayer oriented aspects of their roles. And so I love the reminder, never have to apologize for turning pastoral in this podcast. It's a good place for it. I wonder if we can shift gears a little bit. You can tell me more about the dynamic of Southeast Christian. How many campuses? What is the style of these kind of campuses in terms of, are you doing video preaching? Is it like synced in from a streaming campus? And then what is the actual worship team, kind of tech team dynamic there? Is it live music at every campus? Is it streamed? Is everybody synced up over time? Like, walk us through kind of maybe even more the technical aspects of what those different locations look like.
Yeah. So we're a church of 30 plus thousand in weekend in-person attendance, spread out over 16 campuses. And so that's the full wider context of maybe the scope of church. We do stream our sermon from a broadcast campus out to our regional campuses via Resi. We do not send we send a stereo pair of audio, so we're not locking in on click or anything else like that. Usually our sermon transition includes prayer one way or the other. And so our pastors really like praying out of a common worship song together versus, tossing to a bumper or things like that, which we've done historically. It just kind of keeps you in the heart moment. We have live music and live music teams at all of our campuses. We have worship staff at those campuses. We have one production staff member at each of those campuses. And kind of what we've tried to do in a system side is we resource a set list and we resource a bank of songs per series that we do. We have some things that we all lock in on every week, and we have some areas that our campuses are free to go, hey, that song doesn't hit here, so I'm going to do this one instead. And so our pastor really has a heart for empowerment, and we want our campuses to view themselves as empowered and entrusted to lead their campus, and rather than execute the exact same minute for minute program or word for word program across 16 places. So there's a high value on innovation, on experimentation at campuses. And if you want to try some things, go for it. Here's where we're going to be locked in. Everything else, you kind of have a wider box to play in and a longer leash to play with, which provides a lot of opportunity and sometimes a big need for communication and
Yeah.
what's going on. It's hard to keep tabs on a lot of that. CCLI is sometimes a nightmare to report, but we figured out some systems to support that kind of freedom. So we resource a simple ProPresenter file for all of our campuses. That is kind of we call it our global programming, which is like, this is relevant to, all campuses. We do the same thing with a centralized Ableton file. And so here's transitions. Ableton triggers lyrics at all of our campuses. So between these two files, all of your worship things are taken care of and have song banks and everything else. So if you need to switch out a song, our MIDI cues travel with that Ableton file per song.
Wow.
So we've tried to rely on automation and something specifically more in production that really we've tried to say is like, we want to be aligned where it matters most. And we want to be efficient, and we want to get out of the way where we just don't need to worry about controlling things. So that's kind of the ministry scope.
Yeah, break that piece down that you just said. Aligned in the places that matter most, and kind of free in the places that it's not worth getting kind of tied up in. Like, give us some, if you can break it down, give us some examples of how you've handled some of that conversation, or what some of those, actually real life examples would be for you guys. What matters most versus what can kind of be tossed aside or handled a little bit more creatively.
Yeah. So what matters most is generally content direction and content values. And so we want to talk, we're talking about unity this weekend. So we want to talk about unity. Well, a campus may decide hey, here's how I want to get into service this weekend, introducing this theme. Some other campuses may decide, I'm really going to end with this emphasis of unity. And both are accomplishing the value. One's going to happen at the welcome, one's going to happen at the dismiss. We're not going to overly script that because we want our campus pastors prayerfully leading their rooms
Hmm.
and their people through that value. We receive communion every week. We celebrate baptisms every week at all of our campuses. And so we generally try to have communion somewhat dictated. Hey, it's going to be integrated within sermon, or it's kind of free to go wherever you want it to go. If you want to do 2 songs communion, 2 songs sermon, because you really want to front load your worship set, go for it. If you want, 2 songs communion 1, you can get in a little quicker. That's up to you. When we have video moments and things like that we really want to integrate and that communicate, hey, this is a thoughtful path, then yeah, we call that a fixed element. And so here's the vision, here's what need it serves. And so from this mark to this mark, we're all want to be in alignment. Everywhere else, you guys pastor, be creative, innovate for your context. Because, it's what we've said before. Planning center is a tool, but the spirit moving and active in those individual bodies of people is more important than a centralized program sheet. And so we want to provide some alignment, some common vision, some common values, but we don't want to create an unnecessary ceiling for people to just be execution mode instead of ministry minded mode.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys, I mean, with using Resi, you guys can really enable that creativity and kind of that spontaneity too. In terms of, a pastor wants to take it a different direction in the room, you can, you can essentially launch into the Resi decoder whenever you are ready for it, right? You can create some of that space and then pivot to that tool at the right time for that location. Do you guys have a central kind of communication hub for all your campuses during Sunday services? Is everybody in the same state, time zone, all that kind of stuff?
We're all in the same time zone. Yes, we're not in the same state. We have a campus in Southern Indiana. We use Teams as a communication tool, which
Sure.
I don't want to hate on Teams, but it's probably not a great real time communication tool. If anyone uses Teams, you know that you get a lot of notifications and then you open the app and then nothing that you got notified about is actually in the app. And so sometimes it's a bit of a headache. But generally we try with our campuses to get on the same page as to what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as sometimes we try to innovate and provide a little bit more clarity, and maybe at our broadcast campus, and that clarity isn't actually, it's actually less clear at the regional campuses. And so we provide that feedback loop, certainly, but it's not rocket science, and we try not to create unnecessarily burdensome execution models, because some of our campuses, we don't have black rooms at some of our campuses. And so the entire technical infrastructure is a front of house booth where you have video lighting in front of house.
Yep.
And our staff member is somewhere between one of those areas. And so they're hitting a stream deck based on a queue. So it's not like they're scrubbing Resi or anything else. So it needs to work. It needs to be efficient, but also not super complicated.
Yeah. How have you integrated that culture over time? You might not be the sole person responsible for that culture, but how have you continued that culture of simplicity and efficiency, but effectiveness, over across all these campuses? 16 campuses is not a small feat. So it is a lot to kind of maintain unity of vision, unity of kind of standard of excellence, but also you're always striving to not overcomplicate. And I like the word, not burdensome systems for people to execute. So how have you navigated some of the tools that are available out there right now that you can, continue to simplify and streamline?
Yeah, we have campuses that are, I think, 12 plus years old, and those campuses automation was not nearly as accessible 12 years ago as it is today.
Right.
And so a lot of it has been coordinating how and when we update systems, so that when we update to a new tool, we try our best to do that everywhere. We may test it 2 or 3 places. We're doing that this weekend. We're testing how to frame our. We do virtual teaching, so nearly every campus has an actual large 16:9 center screen
Mm-hmm.
and functional iMag. So there's an actual 6 foot person communicating in the room. Well, we're trying to innovate around how do we use the full real estate of that to show some sermon artwork, to shrink the stage, because maybe you don't actually want to see the keys player at the broadcast campus at your local campus, to give
Yeah.
a little bit more of a tailored view. So we're trying to innovate within the tools we have from a repeatable standpoint. I think that's one of the biggest things is we have campuses that are run by volunteers when we don't have a production staff. And so we need to constantly be thinking about what's the highest output that we can have in a repeatable, sustainable model that a volunteer can operate. And certainly a lot of tools like Stream Deck and ProPresenter automation, Ableton automation help a lot on
Yeah.
that end.
When you think about your campuses, maybe you can even walk back a couple of years and walk me through, but do you guys have the same systems at every church? Is it same console? Is it kind of copy and paste for the infrastructure there, or is it pretty diverse across the different locations?
Yeah, that's probably that has been a hill that we have tried to die on, is that we are going to make central decisions that provide similar infrastructure everywhere. So every campus we're ironically centrally at our broadcast campus, we run Digico here. We run Yamaha at all of our regional campuses. And so every campus
Interesting.
right now has a CL5, and some of that is based around user interface, and some of that's IO, just what works and scales better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have, generally speaking, we have Jan's lighting systems at all of our regional campuses. We have a Grand MA, we have a Grandma 3 here.
Yeah.
And so, some of that scale, we have a 7,600 seat auditorium at our broadcast campus. And a
Wow.
lot of our other venues are, I think max out around 1,500.
Okay.
Some are even down to like, 500, 600.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of that's what scales, what can be teched well and efficient, what has the right balance between cost, user interface, and user flexibility. And certainly as our staff grows, we are outgrowing some of those systems.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure some of that out. I think we've hit our ceiling with the CL5 as
Mm-hmm.
to how much we can maximize that. And so we're looking into DM7s and some other things like that may provide a lot more customization and probably better functional output at
Yeah.
some of our campuses, just with control and how customizable the console can actually be for felt needs. But we try to have the exact same gear as rinse and repeat as humanly possible, so that someone else can also just sub in.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to take a vacation or you get sick, or we have some females on our team, and one of our production directors had a baby, and so she went on maternity leave. You want another staff member to be able to sub in and not go, I have no idea how you piecemealed this together, or how you
Right.
run it versus how we run it. And so there's been an emphasis on here's how we execute across different venues and different campuses.
Yeah. I love that. I want to wrap our time, and I want to hear more about on your end. What got you into creating content? What motivated you to kind of start posting on Instagram and getting more of that kind of POV experience online?
So I'm an Enneagram 5. I don't know if you all talk about Enneagrams or if other
Yep.
people really geek out on that. Which my core fear is not being good at what I do or being unnecessary, right? So I have never believed that I'm good at anything. It's a conversation that me and our LD have quite a bit. Is like we have this very real insecurity, and some of it was genuinely like I wanted to get feedback on how I could grow. So I actually started releasing content 10 months ago. So I've not really been invested in this for a long time. And it was because I was filling in, we were down an audio role, and I thought, I really want to get better, and I just want to put this stuff out there to see who could give me feedback. And then I started getting some traction, got connected. I'm an awful networker. I'm just an introvert by nature. And so I don't like traveling, all these things. Right. And so I'm like, Groundhog Day would be my dream, because it's like the same day over and over again.
Right.
So started making content, and then really saw it as a recruiting tool. We had some open positions, and I thought, man, I want to be able to share what our team's doing. And so, hey, Sheldon, what's our lighting rig? Hey, Corey, what cameras are we using? Hey, Jeremy, what's our online setup? Hey, Leandro, to walk us through, how you photograph weekend services, right? And that has kind of bled into a little bit of this idea that culturally now we want to share the work we do. Mm-hmm. And so a couple other people on our team are starting to do it a little bit more. It opens some doors relationally that have been really mutually beneficial for me as a leader to grow. Gotten some mentors and some guys that I really look up to who have been doing what I'm doing at different scales. And so that's pushed me to, I think, be a better pastor, be a better leader, and be a little bit more thoughtful about my own blind spots. But nowadays, more than ever, there are tools and there are resources, but people are looking for that quick inspiration. Mm-hmm. And I know when I'm trying something new, if I could see somebody else do it versus take a class, that kind of visual inspiration without, it's not long form, it's 90 seconds, right. It's 20 seconds, really helps. And something that I've talked about with a couple other guys online is I think people are just dying for shortcuts. And I think that's a real thing. And so being able to screenshot how are you treating a snare drum? What are you doing to a vocal? What are your camera settings? How are you coloring your camera? All of those things are really relevant. And we do them at a high scale, but I think something that is unique about Southeast in general is I think we really try to outperform the gear we have. And we really try to ride our gear at its ceiling. And so we do not have the newest. I'm mixing on a SD8 that's 16 plus years old. There are faders. There are faders that don't work. We have those are. If you looked at our monitor console, there's gaff tape on 4 or 5 channels that's like, don't put an input here because the fader's just going to go up and down the whole time. And I think people can quickly look at a church of our size and go, you all have the best of everything. And I don't want to say we don't have great gear, because we do. And we're wildly thankful for it. But we are probably working with a lot of the same headaches and a lot of the same tools and a lot of the same old infrastructure that a lot of other churches do. We were teching our PA for a year and a half before we got a new one because the processes were dying. Yeah. It took our PA shutting off multiple times on a weekend for us to start having that conversation of, do you think it's time? And we are not supporting our hallways and bathrooms and cry rooms with audio because we've not yet gotten around to it. And so those are just real things that sometimes the size and scope can get lost. And so back to why I make content. I make content because I hope it's relatable. I hope it's encouraging somebody. I hope it's pushing people to be unashamedly really good at what they do, but also do it with a heart of humility and ministry. Mm. And that's what I think is God has blessed this church with a wonderful team who I think hold those two things in tension really well. And so a lot of it is hopefully inspiration, encouragement, and relatability.
Yeah. One of the first pieces of content I think I saw on your channel was one week where I think the Digico froze, or you had to reboot in the middle of a service, and you actually had it on record, like you were filming kind of that spot of the
Yeah.
service, and you kind of walk through like what you were doing to troubleshoot. And for me, that's what really motivated me to reach out to you, because I was thinking, man, most guys would be so tempted with big church, big team, lots of campuses, to just show like the highlights. And you showed, like, I think what you just said, like, you have some of the same headaches that all the other small to mid-sized churches have. And what I appreciated was that you didn't like make this massive excuse or anything like that, or you didn't type out a reasoning for why it happened, who's at fault. You just showed how you handled it. And so I thought, man, this is kind of a different POV for content that I really appreciate, seeing some of the sequence, hearing some of your processing through the moment of like, okay, what can I do to actually, keep services moving, but, having to reboot the console is no small feat in the middle of a service. So I feel like a lot of our listeners, maybe last takeaway here, a lot of our listeners are in that same situation. They've got old gear, it's dying, it's giving its problems, broken faders, whatever it might be, broken inputs, bad infrastructure, and maybe the hill to climb to get that replaced or to get that fixed or updated is huge. It's astronomical. It's no budget or small church and not enough time or resources or people. What are some piece of encouragement or maybe mental frameworks that you would use or give to those people to handle that season, not only in preparation for a repair or a swap, but also just, kind of sitting in that tension for a while?
Yeah, I think you have to live at your means, and sometimes that means communicating up to your pastor or your team. We can't do that because of this, and there are certain things you want to push on. Critical points of failure are usually not things you want to push on. And so whatever your technical ceiling may be, there are certain things that stress gear or stress systems or stress power, and you really want to be thoughtful not to push into those. And being open about that and being, I think, real with people around you that this isn't a risk worth taking is probably the biggest thing. Some people try to do what I'm doing, which is, we live at our ceiling. Sometimes you got to live a step or two below that in order to provide a safety net. Language that we have a lot is like, what's my parachute? And so at any point, can I point to what our plan is if our video system goes down? Because it's happened, right? And so what's our parachute when video goes down? What's our parachute when lighting goes down? What's our parachute when wireless flakes out? What's our parachute when monitor desk dies? We still to this day have a battery backup system that we test every service. It's a floor pocket with a hardwired microphone that is hardwired to a speaker with a power conditioner on it. So if power dies, we have a battery microphone that works. That is something we test every single service to this day. And it is so much about what do you do when this thing goes down and how do you maximize that? And how do you sometimes live with it joyfully? And so if you have a piece of gear that's giving you a headache, how do you learn to fall in love with that headache a little bit so that working with it, massaging it, spending time with it is something that can give you life. And that's going to be a different headspace for everybody. But I would encourage everyone to think about those pain points as opportunities to grow, learn, be creative, or reinvent something that's asking you for a new opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
that's a really good answer to the question. I think that definitely suffices, and I appreciate the insight there. I think it'll be massively helpful for our listeners. Brad, I really appreciate your time. I want to honor your time and let you get back to your day. So tell our people as we sign off where they can find you. What's your Instagram handle? If they want to connect more about what is happening at Southeast, where would that be the best place to connect there?
Yeah, so you can follow our team, Southeast on Instagram, Southeast Christ, Southeast Creative, Southeast Worship. That's kind of our umbrellas. My name is Brad Bramer. You can find me there. Posting front of house videos or doing something stupid and chasing raccoons, or my Instagram algorithm's all out of whack. So uh, but you could do it there, and hopefully it's a spot that you can connect us, some of our team, see what they're up to, and any way that I or our team or our church can be a resource. It is certainly the spirit of our staff here to resource other churches and to be an open door or a place to find some affirmation. So
Yep.
feel free to reach out to me or our team. We'd love to hang.
I love it. Thanks, Brad, for being on the show today. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother.